Our reading this morning comes from Jeffrey Herbert. This is New People Came This Time. New people came this time, and we shared our stories, the familiar truths about shock and healing, and being glad that at last our children can say who they are, and we know them now, love them more. Funny stories and good news ripple around, and smiles about lesbian ways and jokes against ourselves, taking the masks off to show the same donkey faces underneath. A communion of laughter. And several dawns once more lit up among us, and sharpness of beginning sight, a slower sunrise over the years, other eye openings, painful or proud, all good, a communion of wisdom. But this time, we nearly all wept with the blinding new hurts, winced with what we thought had been healed, old wounds waiting. We put the tissue box in the middle and passed it around, a communion of tears. We all wear masks at times in our lives, and not just the ones that we have gotten used to wearing, more or less, on our faces these last 4.5 years. There are, of course, all kinds of masks: surgical, gas, Halloween, masquerade, sleep, clay, mud, peel-off facial masks, CPAP, ritual, and sock and buskin, the comedy and tragedy masks symbolizing theater from ancient Greece. They all serve all kinds of purposes: safety, health, fun, decoration, and others. Maybe you are familiar with Greek theater masks. It is believed that mask wearing in theatrical performances came from the religious tradition of wearing masks in rituals honoring various gods. Eventually, this practice became particularly connected with the god Dionysus. Dionysus is known by many as the god of wine, but this is a simplistic understanding. He was actually the god of transformation, so more accurately, he would have been the god of turning grapes into wine. Masks then empowered players, actors, to demonstrate the act of transformation that characters often experienced over the course of plays, especially in tragedies, and for the actors to take on these roles. They were often large, which offered the benefit that people throughout the theater could see them better. The masks were often like helmets, covering the head and then having enlarged features. Because of the way that they were designed, they often allowed some additional voice amplification. In massive theaters, some of which held upwards of 15 or 17,000 people at a time, these features were especially important. The expressions helped viewers identify the roles and characters that were being played and helped people follow the story better at times. Authors used this to their advantage to engage their characters in unexpected transformations. And another benefit of using masks was that they allowed different people to play different roles than they might have been able to otherwise. For example, they could easily portray another gender or age than they were in their lives. This also could allow the same actors to switch between characters in different scenes. This was very common, as ensembles were often limited to 3 speaking players. Can you imagine? Where there were staple, stereotypical characters, masks could be reused among different performances so long as they lasted, and helped orient people to who a character was without much introduction. Masks allowed for accessibility and flexibility in production in these ways. The use of masks like this relied on the actor to make the characters come to life. They would need to use their voices and their bodies to convey themselves in a way that faces might typically otherwise. Think of needing to tilt your head instead of being able to raise your eyebrows, or gesturing instead of just offering a glance. Masquerade masks were also popular a couple of millennia later throughout Europe. It's believed that this practice of mask wearing came out of religious-related traditions as well, those associated with the celebration of Carnival. The practice goes back hundreds of years and was a public event marking the final days before Lent began, ending on Mardi Gras, also called Shrove or Fat Tuesday. It was a time of celebration and partying with music, dances, performances, entertainment, gambling, and occasions for indulgence in both food and pleasure. Although at first, Carnival was only officially acknowledged on Mardi Gras, it was typically celebrated for at least 2 weeks before Lent began, and sometimes even started on December 26th through Ash Wednesday. In Venice, Carnival had significance not only for the festivities that took place, but because of the masks and costumes people wore as part of their celebrations. This was the one time every year that people of the lower classes were given freedom and anonymity to mingle with the upper classes, to mock authority and the aristocracy, and to experience a leveling of the social divisions that they were not otherwise entitled to. It was a time of fun and revelry and drew people from across Europe. Over time, the parties and performances became wilder. Another effect arose from what became increasingly elaborate masking and costuming: the rise of crime, including theft, carrying weapons, and basically anonymous gambling, where unidentified people could game and be untraceable to creditors. And Halloween, too, has its own history with masks, of course, although much of what has been said about Mardi Gras and Carnival apply to Halloween here now, as those pre-Lenten holidays have decreased in their practice in the United States. One of the slight variations on this obvious dressing up as hero or whatever feature has become popular over the last few generations, but dressing up has a much longer and not as friendly history. Into the 20th century, early 20th century, Christians wore masks and costumes on Halloween as a way to both ward off death as well as engage with it. And pagans have worn costumes and masks as a way to ward off evil spirits. Like with the masquerades of Venice, people also use their masks and costumes to play tricks and pranks on each other at times. Crime during Halloween actually became so problematic in our own US history at one point that parties and the holiday began to be shut down until around World War II, when Halloween was recast as a holiday for children. Over the course of the last century or so, Halloween has been amplified by US American culture. While masks were previously intense and terrifying and utterly creepy, and not the cool creepy that we've come to know, but like creepy, they became more of an opportunity to be heroes, beginning with the likes of Mickey Mouse, Popeye and Olive Oyl, and Little Orphan Annie. Some also took the opportunity to faux experience what it would be like to be on the margins, like homeless folks or pirates or any number of other identities. I have been struck at how often mask wearing, and costumes seem to correlate frequently with the bringing together of two worlds, between human and gods, between different classes or parts of society, between life and death. Masks represent the power of either bringing an opposite closer or being able to pass on to the other side, or letting the other side pass on to us. Halloween, masquerades, and other celebrations that have involved mask and costume wearing have a tradition of inviting us to consider ourselves as something or someone different, someone we admire, maybe for one reason or another. Maybe we admire their strength, their adventurousness, their wisdom, their humor. Having an opportunity to emulate our heroes can let us practice leaning into those practices and qualities that we want to cultivate for ourselves. as if somehow taking on another person's persona will give us some power to be more like them, mixing that wonder and magic that has been a part of mask-wearing traditions for millennia. For some, Halloween being a chance to turn convention and social norms on their head appealed very much to those who were on the margins. Those exploring their gender identities and sexualities were allowed this one night of the year to experiment and dream about their lives and their selves. Which begs the question, what are the masks all of us wear in our lives? When we celebrate holidays and occasions, we put on literal masks and costumes, but we often do this in our daily living as well, even if we don't think of it this way. We get dressed up in suits and ties, blouses and skirts, and head off to face a day in corporate America, a place where that cultivates mask wearing like few other places in my experience, or some business or professional practice. We put on happy faces in our work environments we keep seeking for wealth or status to keep up with the Joneses or the Kardashians or the Martha Stewarts or whoever it is we're wanting to be like. These are all examples of mask wearing. Or we may be like Robin Williams, Marilyn Monroe, Anthony Bourdain, or any number of famous people who were brilliant and talented, who struggled with mental health issues. They wore masks as best they could until it became too painful for them to continue. As Ram Dass, a famous spiritual teacher and author, said, in most of our human relationships, we spend much of our time reassuring one another that our costumes of identity are on straight. Many of us have been groomed to be this way from our earliest days, striving to live into the experiences or hopes or dreams that family or whoever had for us. To be like our parents in their professions, to become someone in a more valued profession, to have been a son or a daughter, whichever one you weren't, and on and on. Mask wearing is often named by people with marginalized identities, that they had to be in the closet or to pretend not to be gay or bi or trans or queer or whatever their sexual, gender, or affectional identities were. Or that they had to pass as white in white middle-class culture. Or they struggle with or misdiagnosed mental or other disabilities like PTSD and chronic illnesses. But it's many of us. Somehow we get so overwhelmed with messages of shoulds and oughts that we become lost, even to ourselves. This is compounded for younger folks by a poor economy that hasn't allowed the financial freedom or independence of past generations. And then suddenly, or slowly, or both as it happens, something begins to shift, to change. Often it's that we are suffering so much that we reach bottom and realize that how we were living has made a shell of a person, that our lives were superficial and had no meaning. We realize that we've been chasing others' dreams or trying to escape for so long that we don't even know what we're trying to get away from or where we're going. In some ways, those Hallmark holiday movies are true, and that people leave their hometowns to try to find a life and find, when the environment has changed, that they really weren't that happy after all. So what then happens when the masks come off? Author and activist James Baldwin wrote, "Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, and know that we cannot live within." I use the word love here not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. Love for ourselves or love from others may propel us. It may be impossible to return to life as it was as we begin the work of discernment and coming to terms with who we are as we slowly take off the masks. We have to dig deep and be vulnerable and real. Practice being the people that we want to be. We begin the work of transformation, bringing ourselves closer to one another as part of ourselves and to another part of ourselves that we want to show the world. While the masks may have allowed us some sense of power, of freedom, of adventure, it is when the masks come off, not unlike those of the mice in the story, that the work begins of building a life of meaning and purpose. Whether it is by putting on or taking off the masks, may we all discover who it is we were meant to be all along. Before we get to our closing hymn, I wanted to set aside just a few moments for those of us who, perhaps like me, are feeling that the veil has thinned like it does every year around this time. A few moments to acknowledge those we love who have passed beyond the veil. The people who perhaps made us feel like we didn't need to wear a mask, or who taught us to take ours off by showing us how.